Om Namo Bhagavate Sri Arunachala Ramanaya. Namaskaram. Today I'm going to be talking about 3 verses of Guru Vācaka Kōvai, all of which are on the subject of grace. But first, that is verses 696, 965, and 966. In the first verse, 696, I'll first give a little bit of background. There are 2 analogies that are often used in the context of bhakti. That is the Marjala Nyaya, which means the cat analogy, and the Markata Nyaya, the monkey analogy. That is the implication of these analogies are a kitten is totally dependent on its mother. So if the kitten is the kitten just wait for the mother to come and pick it up and carry it to safety, whereas the baby monkey clings firmly to its mother. So it's there's often a discussion about which type of bhakti is better, to be totally dependent on God's grace, or to whether we have to put in our own effort. Bhagavan gives a very nice verdict on this discussion here. What he says here, the basic meaning of the verse is, those who have attained jnana siddhi. Siddhi in this context means accomplishment or attainment. So in other words, those who have attained jnana in this very life, when attachment has ceased, by the power of God's grace, without any effort, by the blemishless cat principle, are those who have practiced devotion in former lives like a monkey. That is, what Bhagavan implies here is, of course, ultimately we have to be totally dependent on grace. But in order to be totally dependent on grace, we have to be completely surrendered. And in order to reach that state of that level of surrender, where we can be completely dependent on grace, we need to strive on the path of bhakti, clinging to God, either in name and form, or better still, clinging to God as he actually is, ever shining in our heart as our own being. People think that surrender is very easy. It's actually the most difficult thing. Surrender is not just a matter of saying, I surrender, and then getting on with our life. Surrender means not rising as ego. So we have to be very mature in order to be so subsided that we depend on God entirely. Merely thinking that we surrendered and then rising as ego, making effort for so many things in the world, that is not surrender. Surrender is the state where ego doesn't rise at all. So in order to gain that maturity where we are where we are willing to subside completely and depend entirely upon grace, effort is necessary. That's why Bhagavan says those who, what he refers to in the first half of the verse, those who have attained jnana siddhi in this very life, when attachment has ceased, by the power of God's grace, without any effort, by the blemishless cat principle. This is a very beautiful description of Bhagavan himself. That is, he had seemingly in this life, he attained without any effort. The fear of death came to him, he turned his mind inwards, and he merged back into the source. It was entirely by the power of grace, rather than any effort on his part. But he was able to be so complete, he was able to turn within so effortlessly and subside back into the heart only because of the practice that had gone on in the spiritual sadhana, the abhyasa, the practice that had gone on in previous lifetimes. Bhagavan himself once said about himself, when someone asked him how he was able to attain seemingly so effortlessly, he said, Edo vittukarai tottukarai. That's an expression in Tamil that's very difficult to well, it's almost impossible to translate into English, but the idea is what was done but was left incomplete in previous lives resumed in this lifetime. So that means that he had done all the sadhana that was necessary, but it hadn't quite reached completion in previous lives. So in this lifetime, he was born with such extreme maturity that at the appropriate time, when by grace that fear of death arose in him, he turned his mind within. And that is, it is natural for him to turn his mind within. That is, when the fear of death comes to us, the normal response of the mind is to go outwards. That is, when we fear, when the fear of death comes, we fear to lose all that we are now attached to. That is, because we identify this body as I, we in our experience we have parents, we have spouse, we have children, we have friends, we have so many. We are so identified with the person whom we seem to be. But when the fear of death comes, we fear to lose all these things. This is why it is said, for example, if a person is drowning, the memory of their past, of everything that they've experienced, of so many experiences from their childhood, from their earlier life, will come flashing before their mind almost like a cinema picture going on. This people who have nearly died by drowning or by other means, they often recount this type of experience. That is because when the fear of death comes, the mind goes outward to cling to all those things they're attached to. Whereas in Bhagavan's case, because he was, as he says here, when attachment has ceased, that his mind was so pure, so free of attachment, that when that fear of death came, what he feared to lose was not all these external things, his own very being, his own existence. So his natural response to the fear of death is, okay, this body has died, but with the death of this body will I also die. So his attention turned inwards to investigate who am I, to investigate what he really is, and thereby he merged back into his source. So that happened naturally by grace because of the maturity that had been gained by all the practice done in previous lives. So what Bhagavan implies in this verse is, yes, ultimately we have to completely surrender to grace, but in order to be fit, in order to be willing to surrender so completely, we need to practice devotion in the monkey style. That is, we need to cling to God. Whether at the initial stages of the path of bhakti, we cling to God in name and form. We take God to be something other than ourselves, and so we meditate on his name or his form. Yeah, of course, God is beyond all names and forms, but he can appear in any name and form. So different devotees are attracted to different names and forms of God. But whatever it is, they cling to a name and form of God. Thereby the mind is purified. And when the mind is purified to a certain extent, they gain the clarity to understand that since God is infinite, nothing can be other than him. So God is most intimately present in us, within ourselves as our own being. He is what we actually are. So when that maturity comes, they then cling to God in the heart, shining as I. This is what Bhagavan refers to in verse 8 of Upadesha India, where he says, rather than Anyabhava. Anyabhava in this context implies meditation upon God as something other than ourselves, as if God is a name or form. So meditating on a name or form of God is what Bhagavan refers to as Anyabhava. Anya means what is other. So whatever name and form of God we may meditate on is something other than ourselves. So rather than that Anyabhava, Ananyabhava. Ananyabhava means meditation on what is not other. So when we recognize that God is what is shining in our heart as I, then we, instead of meditating on an external name and form, we meditate on our own being. So in that verse 8, he says, rather than Anyabhava, Ananyabhava, in which he is I, that means God is what is shining as I, is best among all. So rather than meditating on God as name and form, we meditate on him as our own being. But in both of these, whether we're Anyabhava or Ananyabhava, we have to make the effort, we have to cling. And only by clinging firmly to him does the outward going, the Vishaya Vasanas, the outward going inclinations, slowly diminish and lose their strength. So only when and those outward going inclinations, the Vishaya Vasanas, they are the impurities in the mind. So only when those are reduced to a considerable extent will we be capable of surrendering in such a way that we can depend on God, just as a kitten depends upon its mother. But this is a very, very nice explanation Bhagavan gives here. He obviously the kitten bhava is best. The kitten that is having the surrender of a baby kitten, that is best. But in order to gain that maturity, we have to cling firmly like a baby monkey. So Bhagavan reconciles the seeming, it's due to lack of understanding that people say, oh, this is better or that is better. It is necessary to cling as firmly as we can to God, ideally to God as our own being. And by clinging to him, we thereby subside and gain that maturity to yield ourselves completely to grace. And then, like the mother cat, he comes and picks us up, just like the mother cat comes and picks up the kitten by the scruff of its neck. He comes and he picks us up by the scruff of our neck and takes us to safety. So this is how the spiritual path goes. We have to cling and cling and cling until we subside completely, and then grace takes over. But it's also important to understand even our clinging to him is also by grace, because the love to cling to God, whether as a name and form or as our own being, that love comes only by grace. Because the nature of the mind is to go outwards, to cling to Vishayas. So if we gain the love to turn within and cling to our own being, that love comes not from ego, but only from God, who is our own reality, our own being. So this verse is a very, very beautiful verse and very, very deep in meaning. The implication is we have to cling as much as we can and leave grace. Grace will do its work. We have to do our bit. And then the next verse I'm going to talk about is verse 965. Here, what Bhagavan says is, this is actually quite a well-known saying that if you take one step towards God, God will take 10 steps towards you. But Bhagavan says this in his own words here. The exact meaning is thinking of him. If you approach one step as an appropriate reward for that, more more even than a mother, that Lord, thinking of you, himself coming 9 steps, will receive. See, his grace is so much. That's the literal meaning. What it implies is, thinking of him, if you approach 1 step as an appropriate reward for that, more lovingly even than a mother, that Lord, God or Guru, thinking of you, himself coming 9 steps distance towards you, will receive, welcome, embrace, or adopt you. See, his grace is so much, or of such a nature. So here also, Bhagavan is emphasizing we need to make effort to. Grace is doing everything, but we need to cooperate. So we need to take 1 step towards him. He will take care of everything else. So it may seem from this verse that God will be gracious to us only if we make effort. That is only first. It may imply that we have to take the first step. Then God will do the rest. But even that, as I said earlier, even that first step we take, that is also the grace of God. So ultimately, everything is done by grace. Bhagavan often used to say, grace is the beginning, the middle, and the end, because it is grace that attracts us to this spiritual path. It is grace that gives us the inclination to make effort, to cling to him, to take 1 step towards him. And finally, it is grace that will swallow us entirely. Grace in the form of the light of pure awareness will swallow us entirely. So the major work is done by grace, but we have to cooperate. If we are walking in the opposite direction, God will always be coming after us, but we make it more difficult. But if we are willing to turn back within and take 1 step towards him, he will take care of everything else. He will come the remaining 9 steps and receive us and draw us back into the heart, absorb us back into himself. And then the next verse, verse 966, this is a very, very, very important verse, very deep and significant verse. I'll read the exact meaning, but it requires quite a lot of explanation. And for this verse, Murugan has given, both Sadhu Om and Murugan have given a poriparai, that means an explanatory paraphrase. They've also both given detailed notes. In particular, Murugan's note on this verse, Murugan's explanation of this verse is very, very important. But first I'll read a simple English translation, then I'll read my own explanatory paraphrase, then I'll go on to Murugan's explanation. So the basic meaning of the verse is, if what is alone is divine grace, which flourishes as we are, except that the fault of neglecting what is pertains only to souls who do not think, melting within, how does the fault of not bestowing sweet grace pertain to that being? This is very difficult to, it's a difficult verse to decipher because the sentence structure, it's all one sentence in Tamil, and the sentence structure is not a familiar sentence structure in English. So to make it slightly clearer, in my explanatory paraphrase, how I wrote it is, that is the words he uses for what is Uladu, which means what actually is. And the words he uses for what we are is Ullam. Ullam means both we are and heart. So it has 2 meanings. And we are, he uses as an inclusive form of the singular I am. So when he says grace flourishes as we are, it implies that grace is what is shining in our heart as our own being, I am. So, and the first line of a verse ends with ale. Ale means if, or if it is said that. But it's sometimes used where in English we would use since. So it's more in the sense of since rather than if, but the literal meaning is if, but it implies since. So how I explained in the explanatory paraphrase is, since Uladu, what actually is, alone is divine grace, which flourishes or stands high as Ulam, the heart or we are. Blame for the fault of neglecting Uladu pertains only to souls who do not think of it melting within due to intense love. How instead can blame for the fault of not bestowing sweet grace upon those souls pertain to that Uladu? This, as I said, this is a very difficult verse to translate, but what the implication is, grace is, that is, grace is what actually exists, and it's always shining in our heart as our own being, as I am. When such is the case, if we do not lovingly think of it, that inwardly melting within due to intense love, if we do not think of it in such a way, but simply allow our mind to go outwards, it is we who are not being gracious. How instead can we blame God for being ungracious? That is, he's ever gracious by shining in our heart as our own being. So he makes himself so easily available to us. So if we do not turn within, we are the one who are being ungracious. It's not that God is ungracious. In Murugan's, the meaning of Murugan's explanatory paraphrase is, again, this is Murugan's Tamil is quite tough, but I'll try to explain what it means. If it is said that what one exists in Paramatam, that Maypuru, that real substance, which is Murumudal. Murumudal means the entire first principle, the primary origin of all. So I'll try and break it down a bit. That is, when he says, what one exists in Paramatam, that real substance, that means the real substance that exists in Paramatam. Paramatam means ultimate reality. So that one thing that actually exists, if that alone is the form of divine grace, which dances above or dances high, subduing everything, as the nature of the heart, which exists and shines as Atma-swarupa. Atma-swarupa means the real nature of ourselves, what we actually are, which exists and shines as Atma-swarupa, which is the soul to the soul, as being the abhinna, the indivisible light in every separate soul, we alone are. So he's that which is abhinna means what cannot be divided or separated. So he's that light of awareness, which is the same in every, though the jivas, the souls, seem to be separate. The one thing that is not separate is that light of awareness that is shining within all of them. And as that, he alone is. That is, that reality alone is. So that is grace. And then he goes on to say, except that the fault of negligence, of not thinking of it by mind, is what pertains only to the souls who do not unceasingly investigate that being substance, that Ullaporul, such that not only their body, but also their heart melts and dissolves, thinking of such immense love. So the blame for being ungracious, for neglecting that reality, it's our fault. If we don't attend to him, if we don't lovingly think of him in our heart, think of him with such intense love that not only our body but our heart melts and dissolves, thinking of it, and he says, thinking of such immense love, that grace is the immense love he refers to. That is the Maypuru, the real substance, is so gracious, but it's ever shining in our heart as our own being. If we do not think of that immense love, in other words, we do not fix our mind on him shining in our heart, lovingly shining in our heart as I, we are to blame. And so how does the fault of not giving sweet grace to them, to the souls, pertain to God, who is being substance, who is the Ullaporul, who is the existing reality? And then Murugan goes on to explain this in more detail. Again, even Murugan's prose is very, very different, very tough. So he explains each of the three main components of this verse in one long sentence. But I'll break it up a little bit just to make it easier. Since so that souls need not suffer or make strenuous effort, even a little, in knowing and attaining God, God being and shining within all souls, just as Atma-sarupa, which is the reality of those souls, instead of himself standing as external or alien to them, is the firmness or power or skill, goodness or greatness of the immense grace that he has for them. Bhagavan, said, Ulladu alone is divine grace, which flourishes or stands high as Ullam, the heart or we are. That is what he's saying here is, God exists and shines in our heart as Atma-sarupa, as what we really are, as the reality of those souls. So he's not something external or something alien to us. He's so intimately present as our own being, and he shines like that in order that we need not suffer or make strenuous efforts, even a little, to know him and attain him. That is, he's ever available to us. If we have love to know him, we can know him here and now. So he's making himself so readily available to us. That is why Bhagavan says, Ulladu, what actually exists, alone is divine grace, which flourishes as Ullam. That is, grace is not something other than God. Grace is the very nature of God. And since God is our own being is divine grace, and it flourishes or stands high as Ullam, as our heart or as our own being, we are. So that's the first part he explains. Then in the next clause he says, and since God in the form of brilliance, that means the brightness of awareness that is shining uninterruptedly as I am I in the heart, is granting grace day and night to all souls, he, Bhagavan, said, how does the fault of not bestowing sweet grace upon those souls pertain to that Ulladu? That is, we can't accuse God of being ungracious, when in fact he's, by shining in our heart as I am I, as our own being, as what we essentially are, he's granting grace to us day and night, to each and every soul. And then the third part he explains is in the final clause, and since, unless they look at him, turning within to be facing towards him, the truth that he is thus continuously granting grace to them will not be clear to them. And since for souls who do not, by mind or heart, investigate him, who is the form of grace itself, to say that he does not grant grace to them even a little is therefore a great wrong. Therefore, Bhagavan said, the fault of neglecting Ulladu pertains only to souls who do not think of it melting within. That is, it's not God who is ungracious to us. It's we who are ungracious to him by not turning within and attending to him in our heart, where he's always shining as our own being. And then he goes on to say, since Porul, the one real substance, which is Atma-sarupa, which exists and shines in the heart as one without a second, yet itself seeming as if it were many. That is, actually it's one only without a second, but we see it as all this multiplicity, and that one real substance alone has come to reside sweetly as I am I, separately within each and every soul. That is, actually he's one, but it seems that he's shining as I in each and every one of us. So he seems to be many, who are seemingly many because of upadi. Upadi means the limiting adjuncts, but each one of us mistakes to be ourselves. We take ourselves to be this person. We take ourselves to be this body and mind. This is the upadi. So because of the upadis, we seem to be many. But actually, our reality is only one. But we seem to be many. But because we seem to be many, it is appropriate that Bhagavan has used the plural form ullam. That I'll just explain a little bit about Tamil. That is, the verb ul means to be. So ullain would mean I am. Ullom means we are. But ullom would be the normal form, or even more common would be irikarom. But in literary Tamil, there's another form of ullom, which is ullam. So ullam means we are. So he's using a plural form here. Instead of saying I am, he says we are. How I generally explain this is that Bhagavan is using the plural form as an inclusive form of the first person singular. If he says I am, it excludes us. If he says you are, it excludes him. He's including all of us. So he says we are. And another point in Tamil there are two words that mean we. There's nam and nangal. Nam means we, including whoever is being spoken to, whereas nangal means we, excluding whoever is being spoken to. So it's the inclusive form of the first person plural that he uses, and he's using it as an inclusive form of this singular. So it implies I am, but because we seem to be many, he says we are. That's the explanation Murugan gives. And then he goes on to say, since in Tamil the heart has come to be called ullam, that the ullam also means not only we are, it also means heart. Since in Tamil the heart has come to be called ullam, because it is a vast space for that, meaning Atma-swarupa, being and shining. In other words, it's the vast space but is shining as the being and shining as a reality. So heart is sometimes said with the place where God resides, but it's also God himself. That is the word heart means the center. So what shines in the center is the center of the center. So the ultimate center, the center of all centers, is the ultimate heart, and that is God or Ulladu, or so it's appropriate both to say it is the heart and it's in the heart, as Bhagavan says in verse 2 of Arunachala Patikam, because you always shine in the heart as I, they say your name is heart. So he's addressing Arunachala, obviously, and he's saying Arunachala is what is shining in the heart, and it is the heart. He's shining in the heart as I, therefore he is the heart, because that I that is shining in the heart is itself the heart, and that is Arunachala, that is God, that is Ulladu, that is what actually is. So, so what Murugan says here, because he's always that is, whether you say God or Arunachala or Bhagavan or Atma-swarupa or Ulladu or whatever, it's all amounts to the same. That is being and shining in the heart as the heart. And because it's our very being, it's called Ullam, which also means we are. here, so since it is in Tamil, the heart has come to be called Ullam. Here, that name Ullam intentionally has a double meaning. So both those meanings, namely we are and heart, stand simultaneously. So the import of this verse is grace is always shining in us as our own being, as the heart, as I am, as we are. So when it is so, grace is ever making itself available to us. So we can't say that God is ungracious to us. He's abundantly gracious to us. We are ungracious to him by not lovingly attending to him in our heart. Sadhu Om has also written a note for this in which he explains the first person awareness am is the experience of everyone. This being awareness exists and becomes clear to us only by immense grace, which is God graciously residing within us as our own self. Therefore, God exists in such a way as to bestow grace on all in the form of the awareness I am. That is, it's his very nature to bestow grace, because his very nature is to be our own being. He is our own being. And by being our own being, that is his bestowing grace upon us. Since the awareness am, which is this light of grace, is the greatest aid enabling jivas to be saved by attaining him, this itself is said to be the divine grace of God. That is, just as Murugan says at the beginning of his note, it's in order to make him, in order to remove any difficulty in knowing and attaining him. That is, if he was something other than us, something alien, something external to us, then it would be difficult to know him. But he's ever shining in our heart as our own being, and that which we are always clearly aware of. We're always clearly aware of our being as I am. So how can it be difficult for us to know him? If we don't know, so he makes it so easy for us to know him. If we fail to know him, that is because that is the lack of grace is on our part. We are lacking, we are ungracious to him. He's so gracious to us, making himself so easily available to us, but we are so ungracious to him. We turn our back on him and run after the petty pleasures of the world. That is the implication. So Sadhu Om goes on to say, when it is so, since souls remain attending only to second and third persons, that means things other than ourselves, instead of attentively investigating Atman, which is being awareness, which is in the form of the first person. That is, we always experience it as the first person, as I. It becomes necessary to say that only for souls is there no grace towards God. That is, we are the ones who are ungracious to God. It's not God who is ungracious to us. Therefore, the import of this verse is that only souls are subject to the fault of being ungracious, whereas God is not subject to it at all. We cannot blame God for being ungracious. He's ever gracious. We are the ones who are ungracious. That is the implication of this verse. And Bhagavan makes it very clear here. Grace is not something, as Bhagavan often said, grace is not something that's going to one day descend from heaven. Grace is ever present in us. It's ever shining in our heart as our own being. All that is required is for us to yield ourselves to that grace by lovingly turning our attention within.
So the first question is, in the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna...
No, there was one other. That was the one that came more recently. Before that, there was the question sent by Swami Nivrittananda, which was about grace. It was the first one in the email I sent to you yesterday.
Okay. All right, let me see. isn't this the one? I think this is the one. This is the one by Swami
Oh, I
Nityananda.
see. Yes, I see. Yes, you're taking up the second paragraph. Right. Sorry, it's me. I'm confused.
Oh, it's all right. Yeah. So the question. All right. Let me just see if I can get this right. Yeah.
There's one paragraph before that in the Q&A session.
Oh, that way. All right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I just thought that that
Yeah.
was. Oh, right. Yes. Yeah. Um, in the Q&A session that followed your exposition of the fourth verse of Sri Arunachala Padikam, you said by way of a reply to a question whether grace is earned in the negative. In the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna explains the Sanskrit word for grace, kripa, in the following way. Kri, the verbal root, means to do, and pa, the verbal root, means to get. So kripa means to do and get, which implies that grace is earned. Bhagavan also says, maybe in talks, that God's grace is bestowed upon that person who has striven earnestly for long periods of time on the spiritual path. This statement also seems to imply that grace is earned as a result of one's own efforts. In the New Testament, Jesus Christ is recorded to have said, "Seek, and ye shall find. Knock, and the door shall be opened unto thee. Ask, and it shall be given unto thee," which again implies that by seeking, knocking, and asking, the grace will certainly be bestowed upon us, meaning that one can earn grace by these means. All these statements of these three great spiritual giants seem to imply that grace is conditional, that it is something that cannot be taken for granted, but is to be earned the hard way. So one may as well wonder as to what makes grace truly unconditional.
Okay. Well, this question fits perfectly with these verses. That is, grace is unconditional. Grace is the very nature of God, and it's ever shining in our heart as our own being, as I am. So there's no conditions on that. However, as Bhagavan explained, grace, um, because grace is our real nature, it is what we actually are, it works through us. So we have to cooperate with grace. We have to yield ourselves to grace. That is, as Bhagavan said, grace is always pulling pulling the mind inwards from within and pushing the mind inwards from outside. That is all there's so many things in the external life that push our mind inwards, but all the suffering we undergo is pushing our mind inwards. All the good things that happen, all the coming to Bhagavan is we've been brought to Bhagavan by grace in order to have our mind pushed within. So grace is working both from within and from outside to pull us within. But we have to yield ourselves to it. If we are always enthusiastically going outwards, um, chasing the things of the world, we are resisting that inward pull of grace. In the 13th paragraph of Nana, Bhagavan says, in one sentence, he says, since one Parameshwara Shakti, that Parameshwara Shakti means the power of the Supreme Lord, or the supreme power of the Lord, of God, which is obviously grace. Since that one Parameshwara Shakti is driving all karyas. All karyas means everything that whatever needs to or ought to be done or to happen. Everything is being made to happen by him. So when such is the case, instead of we also yielding to it, why to be perpetually thinking it's necessary to do like this, it's necessary to do like that? So he says here, instead of we also yielding to it, so that grace is doing everything, but we must be willing to yield ourselves to it. If we're constantly thinking, I need to do this, I need to do that, I've got to pay my bills, I've got to earn money to take care of my family, I've got to do this, I've got to do that, and I've also got to do all my meditation and all these things, we are not yielding ourselves to grace. So grace is not earned, it's ever present, but we need to be willing to yield ourselves to it. So it's not a matter of grace being earned. It's a matter of grace is ever present. Grace is always doing its work. It's the very nature of God to be gracious. But we need to be willing to yield ourselves to it, to surrender to it, to cooperate with it. He's trying to pull our mind within. If we're always trying to go outwards, we are resisting that inward pull. So how can we cooperate with it? How can we yield ourselves to it? By trying to turn within. So that's why in that verse about the kitten bhava and the monkey bhava, we need to be like the monkey, the baby monkey. We need to cling firmly to our mother. If we hold on firmly to the mother, she will take care of everything. She will jump from tree to tree or keep us out of danger. But we have to hold firmly to her. That means we have to. That is not. We are not earning grace. We are cooperating with grace. That is, if the baby monkey doesn't hold on to the mother, it can't blame, oh, the mother's not helping me. The baby monkey has to hold on to the mother. And only when it holds on to the mother more and more firmly does it gain the maturity to subside and depend entirely upon the mother. And then she comes and picks it up by the scruff of the neck, like the cat picking up the kitten. So we have to do our part. We have to cooperate. Another thing about grace, the idea of grace being earned. If there's something that we can do to earn grace, that implies that grace is a karma phala, the fruit of an action. But karmas and their fruits are finite, whereas grace is infinite. So how can anything we do, how can we earn grace? So it's wrong to think of it in terms of earning grace, but grace is ever present. We need to yield ourselves to it. Ramakrishna gave two very nice analogies for this. One analogy he gave was, he said, the wind of grace is always blowing, but we need to unfurl our sails. Because he lived on the banks of the Ganga, he was often seeing the boats going about their business, fishermen or people transporting things from one side of the river to the other. But in those little boats, they had sails. So when the wind is blowing, the boatman will hoist his sail, will unfurl the sail, and then he takes advantage of wind. But if the boatman never unfurls his sail, though the wind is blowing, the boat is not going to move unless the sail is unfurled. So what he implied by that is grace is ever present, ever available, but we need to do our part. We need to open our heart to the grace. We need to unfurl our sails. Another nice thing Ramakrishna said, which is very similar to what Bhagavan says, it's said in a more homely way, what Bhagavan says in verse 966 of Guru Vācaka Kōvai. Ramakrishna said, the grace of three people are necessary: the grace of God, the grace of Guru, and the grace of the Jiva. The grace, that is, our grace is necessary. And he said, the grace of God and grace of Guru is always available. In fact, according, as Bhagavan made clear, God and Guru are one and the same. So they're not really two, but they seem to be two. But actually they're one. But we need, our grace is necessary. In other words, we need to make the effort to turn within. And so how do we unfurl our sails? That's very nicely illustrated by another analogy that Ramakrishna gave. That is, he said, the rain of grace is always pouring, but when it falls on a mound, it runs off the mound. It gathers only in the low-lying places. Like when the monsoon rain is pouring, But if on high places, high ground, it runs off. And in the low-lying places, it gathers. Likewise, grace will gather in the heart of those who are very low, who are very subsided. So if we have strong ego and we rise up, I can do this, I can do that, though the grace is always pouring out, pouring equally on everyone, but it will run off us because of our when the ego rises high, that's like a mound. So, but in order for grace to fill our heart, we need to sink low. In other words, we need to subside. And that is what Bhagavan's teachings are all about. Bhagavan said there are two ways, self-investigation and self-surrender. But he made it clear, ultimately, self-surrender can be complete only by means of self-investigation, because surrender may begin with trying to surrender our will to the will of God. That way we partially subside. But in order to surrender, for the surrender to be complete, we need to surrender ourselves, the one who has a will. That is, so long as we rise as ego, we may be able to surrender our will to some extent, but we cannot surrender our will entirely, because as ego, we will always have a will of our own. So if we want to surrender our will entirely to God, we need to surrender ourselves, this ego, the one who has the will, to God. And the only way to surrender ego is to turn our attention within. So that in order to subside back into the heart, we need to turn our attention back within, and because to the extent to which we attend to ourself, to that extent ego subsides. As Bhagavan makes clear in verse 25 of Uladu Napadu, the very nature of ego is to rise, stand, well, ego cannot rise, stand, or flourish without constantly clinging to form. First, it clings to the form of this body, this bundle of five sheaths that we take ourselves to be. And then it's constantly clinging to other things. He says, Urupatri undu mika ongam. No, I'll just say from the beginning. Urupatri undu, grasping form it comes into being. Urupatri nikkum, grasping form it stands, or it endures. Urupatri undu mika ongam, grasping and feeding on forms, it flourishes abundantly. So clinging to things other than ourselves, to forms, to phenomena, to objects, to vishayas, that is the very food on which ego depends for its survival. So the more we attend to things other than ourselves, the more we are nourishing this ego, and the higher ego rises. Uru victu urupatram, leaving form it grasp form. Tedinal autem pidicum, if sought, it takes flight. That is, if ego seeks to know its own reality, who am I, it will thereby subside and dissolve back into its source. So the only way to make ego subside completely is by turning our attention within and clinging to our own being. That's the way by which we subside. And by subsiding, we become like the low-lying land where all the monsoon rains will gather, where all the rain of grace will gather in our heart to the extent to which we sink low. So what Ramakrishna referred to as unfurling our sails is what he also referred to as being low-lying. So we need to subside, and that is how we're not earning grace, but grace is always there. We are making ourselves a fit receptacle for that grace. If we rise high as ego, thinking I can do this, I can do that, the grace will run off us like water off a duck's back, or water off a mound. But if we sink low, the grace will all accumulate us and will drown in the grace. So it's not a matter of earning grace, it's a matter of yielding ourselves to grace, cooperating with grace. Um, um, I'm just seeing what. Oh, another thing about the etymology that of the word kripa that Ramakrishna gave. Yes, we have to do our bit, but it doesn't mean that we're earning grace, but we have to cooperate with grace. But there's another word in Sanskrit for grace, which is anugraha. And the etymology of anugraha is very nice. Anu means following. Graha means grasping. So the idea of anugraha, just like if a child is in danger, the mother will or father will run after it and catch hold of it. Supposing there's a busy road and a small child wanders out into the middle of a busy road, the mother or father will come running after it and grasp it and pull it back to safety. So we are always, by rising as ego, we expose ourselves to all the dangers of the world. We're like the small child who runs out in the middle of a busy road. We are courting trouble. But God is so gracious that he doesn't just sit there and let us get into trouble. He's constantly coming after us and grasping us and pulling us to safety. Sadhu Om gave a very nice explanation for verse 29 of Upadesha Undiyar. In verse 29 of Upadesha Undiyar, Bhagavan says, Bandavi datra parasaka mutrava inda nilai nitralundi para irepani nitralamundi para. That means being in this state of supreme bliss, which is devoid of bondage and liberation. That is beyond this duality of bondage and liberation. Being in that state of supreme bliss, abiding in this state, that is abiding in the service of God. That irepani nitral, it's a term that's often used in Shaiva Siddhanta, which means being constantly in the service of God. So merely being in our real state of supreme bliss, which is beyond bondage, that is the true service we can do to God. So Sadhu Om used to explain this. If we rise as ego, we are unnecessarily giving God work. God has to come running after us and catch us to save us. If we remain in our natural state of supreme bliss, if we abide in that state, we are thereby serving God by relieving him from the trouble of having to come constantly running after us. So if God is always ready to save us, but if we want to serve God, we need to serve him by yielding ourselves to his grace, by not rising as ego and getting into trouble and making it necessary for him to come running after us to grasp us and save us. Yeah, I'm just saying I made a few notes about this. Grace is the very nature of God, so he can never be ungracious. And he can never be less gracious to some and more gracious to others. He's infinitely gracious to all. So there's nothing we can do to earn grace. All we need to do is to yield ourselves to grace, which is ever shining in our heart as our own being. So we need to stop running outwards. We need to subside back into the heart. That is yielding ourselves to grace. Swami, if you're here, is that a clear answer to your question? Does that reconcile all the seeming contradictions?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay.
So all effort is meant only for making ourselves a fit recipient.
Yes, yes. And even that effort, we are making that effort only by grace. Because
Only by grace, yes, exactly.
what gives us the love to make that effort, that is also grace. That's why Bhagavan
Yes,
said, grace is the beginning, the middle, and the end. Where
yes,
would we be
absolutely.
without his grace?
Yes, yes, absolutely. We are nowhere.
Yeah.
We are nowhere.
There's a beautiful verse of Sadhu Om has sung one beautiful verse. Well, he's sung many beautiful verses, but one I particularly like. The meaning of the verse is Ishtamanu unakilada et salem sayenan. I will not, this is a prayer to Bhagavan, I will not do anything that is against your wish. Ishtamudikilada et sollum sollenan. I will not say anything that is against your wish. Ishtamunikilada enenivu enenan. I will not think any thought that is against your wish. Ishtamide en ninaralal idetri vepaye. You fulfill this wish of mine by your grace. That is, even to surrender to him is possible only by his grace.
Absolutely. 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 Thank you, Michael ji. Thank you
Right.
very much.
Michael, there's one more question on the verse. There was another one from Bruce, but I can't see his hand anymore. Anyway, I'll start with the one which we have here, which is very much exactly what you've just talked about. Is it not as if our efforts are like adding a natural fertilizer to the garden of jnana, which allows grace to grow more efficiently?
Yes, we can say like that. Yes. I mean, grace is always doing its part. We just have to cooperate with it. So we can think of it as adding fertilizer, watering the plants or whatever. We are doing another beautiful analogy is there in the Ramayana. That is when the Sedu Banda, the causeway to cross over to Lanka was being built. So all the monkeys, the very powerful monkeys, they were all coming carrying big stones and putting it there, and so many other creatures were coming to help Rama by building this causeway. And the little squirrel, it also wanted to do its bit, so it came and it was picking up little pebbles and putting them. Of course, that it's not making any difference. The causeway is going to be built anyway, even without. But the squirrel did that out of its love for Rama. It wanted to do its little bit. And in India, the squirrels all have 3 lines on the back. And it is said that the 3 lines on the back of the squirrel is because with 3 fingers, Rama stroked the squirrel with gratitude. So those 3 lines on the back of a squirrel are the mark of Rama's gratitude for the squirrel, that it wanted to do its little bit. Like that, we have to do our little bit. And we can see many pictures of Bhagavan with the squirrels, how they come and play on his laps. If you see those pictures closely, you'll see all those squirrels have these 3 lines on their back. Of course, just like the squirrels, pebbles are not going to make any difference. What we do, in a sense, it's not make any difference. That grace is doing everything. But because grace has to work through us, our willingness to do our little bit, that is what is that is required. Grace will never force upon us. Grace will never force liberation upon us, because liberation is annihilation of ego. So grace isn't going to kill us until we are willing to give ourselves wholly to Bhagavan. When we are willing to give ourselves wholly to him, then only will he swallow us. But even that willingness to surrender to him, even that is the work of his grace. Even that is also by his grace. But so long as we have a sense of doership, it seems to us we are doing something. We are making an effort to turn within. That is absolutely essential. Just like the baby monkey has to cling to its mother, we have to do our bit. He will do everything else. He is always constantly doing everything else. We have to cooperate.
There's a question from Bruce, I think, on the verses.
Yeah, the just another maybe perspective to look at this, the rain, not adhering to the mound, is think of ego as hydrophobic in a sense, and that water, which is grace, the metaphor, it doesn't apply to the mound, but it's that which is ego or the mind is identifies everything as doing, but the actual grace runs deeper, and it's that the mind and the ego have that attention, which it's pulling the grace in a sense, but it doesn't apply to ego. If that is that,
Yeah.
can you?
Yeah, I can. That is Sadhu Om in the path of Sri Ramana in one place. Sadhu Om explains that attention itself is grace. Whatever we attend to, that flourishes. So if there's supposing we have some particular thought in our mind, supposing people have phobias or obsessions, the more and more they think of that, the stronger that thought becomes. Like that, that the more we attend to anything, the more that becomes strong. So if we focus our attention on turning within, that ability to turn within will grow stronger and stronger. Whereas if we're always sending our attention outwards, that outward going tendency of the mind, that outward going inclination of the mind becomes stronger and stronger. So the grace is ever available within us in the form of our own attention. So we have to decide, are we going to bestow our grace upon this world by constantly going outwards? And the more we attend to the world, the more real the world becomes, and the more real and painful all the problems of the world seem. Or are we going to redirect our attention back within? That is another thing that can be said on this. The power of God is one. If we but that power can be used in two ways. It can be used either to going outwardly. Then that power is called Maya. When the same power is used to go within, that power is called grace. Ramakrishna used to talk about Vidya Maya and Avidya Maya. So Avidya Maya, the Maya of ignorance, is the outward going mind. The Maya of the Vidya Maya, the Maya of knowledge, that is grace. That is what the inward going, what the power that draws the mind back within. So we have to choose, do we want Maya or do we want grace? Do we want to experience more and more and more of these external things, or do we want to merge back into our own being, to be in that state of supreme bliss, which is beyond bondage and liberation? We have to make the choice. If we are going outward, we are putting work. We are putting work on God's head because He has to come and save us. If we cooperate with Him by turning within and subsiding back into the heart, we are yield. We are. God doesn't need our service, but He has to serve us because so long as we go outwards, He's having to serve us. If we can relieve Him of that burden of having to serve us by turning within, that is the true service of God. And in all Bhakti traditions, they talk about service to God. But what is real service to God? Real service to God is subsiding back into the heart. And the means to subside back into the heart is by clinging to self-attentiveness. That is the greatest service we can do to God.
One other aspect that Swami referred to was the many, he referred to many saints, let's say, that commented on grace. And this also is an example of, this is, we as ego interpret and identify it as a specific individual that is making commentary on grace. But this is the misconception of mind and ego, and that even this misinterpretation is this is running off the grace, running off the mound of identification with a specific form. And that's something to be this is the beauty part of grace, is that it doesn't adhere to form in that regard. Is that good, Michael?
Yeah, yes. Yeah, but the point is we need to, that is, we yield ourselves to grace, not by doing anything, but by just being as we are. And in order to be as we are, we need to subside. And in order to subside, we need to cling to our own being. But before we have the love to cling to our own being, the grace works by giving us that love for God, as if God is something external to us. So all the worship of God in name and form, all the outward forms of bhakti, they are also a necessary part of the process. But the more mature form of bhakti is to cling to our own being, because God is ever shining within us as our being, as I am. So that is clinging to I am. That is the greatest, most powerful means of subsiding and being as we actually are, which is yielding ourselves to grace.
Lorraine?
From the preface of the teachings of Bhagavan Sri Ramana Maharshi in his own words, edited by Arthur Osborne, it's said here that he said, it, meaning the body, is silent and inert. This is when he was in rigor mortis, when he was 16. I think this is what it's referring to. It, the body, in other words, is silent and inert, but I feel the full force of my personality and even the force of the I within me apart from it. So that's definitely about going within and seeking the grace of God. But then I looked up the etymology of the word personality, and it means to cut through sound. Per is cut through, and sonal is sound. And then after that, he refers to even the voice of I within me is apart from his body. So we're constantly talking about light, but then we also hear about the sound of silence. I just wondered, is this a good translation that we've got from this book, or am I just barking up the wrong tree?
No, this translation is a complete mistranslation. That is, Bhagavan sometimes talked about his death experience, but whenever he talked about it, Bhagavan, this is not Bhagavan's own words, though the title of the book is The Teachings of Ramana Maharshi in His Own Words. Bhagavan generally spoke and wrote in Tamil, sometimes in some other South Indian languages, sometimes he spoke in Malayalam or in Telugu, but mainly in Tamil. Bhagavan understood English. Sometimes he would say a few things in English, but generally he would answer in Tamil and leave it to someone else to translate. So what is this? The first person who recorded Bhagavan's narrating his death experience was B.V. Narasimha Swami, who wrote the first English biography about Bhagavan, the self-realization, and Osborne is drawing from that. But this is a complete misinterpretation, misunderstanding of what Bhagavan said. That is, Bhagavan talks in a very subtle and nuanced way. But so people understand his words according to, as Bhagavan once said, according to the purity of the antakarana, that's according to the purity of the inner instrument, the mind, the same teaching reflects in different ways. So people understand according to, that is, however clearly Bhagavan explains something, each person will understand in their own way, according to their own if you're wearing red glasses, you see everything as red. If you're wearing blue glasses, you see everything as blue. So we are all seeing Bhagavan and his teaching through the colored glasses of our own mind. To the extent that our mind is purified, to that extent we will understand Bhagavan correctly. But it is very clear from many of the recordings of the way people recorded Bhagavan that they didn't really understand. This statement is very, very clearly not what Bhagavan said. Personality is the quality of or the nature of a person. A person is something external. In fact, if you go by the etymology of the word person, the etymology is from a Latin word, persona, which means a mask. The etymology of, the reason a mask was called persona was in actors in plays would have a mask, and through that mask the sound of their voice comes. That's why it's persona. Per means through, and sona means sound. So, but it actually means a mask. So the person we take ourselves to be, that is a mask. It is not what we actually are. What we actually are is pure being, Satchidananda. Pure being, pure awareness, pure happiness. That is what we actually are. But because we rise as ego, we take ourselves to be a person, to be a body consisting of 5 sheaths. That is the physical form of the body, the life that animates it, and the mind, intellect, and will that operate within it. This bundle of 5 sheaths is what makes the person makes up the person we seem to be. But when Bhagavan turned within, the ego was completely annihilated, and the pure I alone remained. So there's no identification with I am a person. So to bring in the word personality here is completely inappropriate. What Bhagavan explain what happened in when that fear of death came to him. He explained it on a number of occasions, and it has been most accurately recorded by Sadhu Om in Sri Ramana. That's the Tamil original of Partha Sri Ramana. In the 8th chapter, he gives he gives the words that Bhagavan actually used in Tamil, and those have been translated in the Partha Sri Ramana, which is the best account I've come across of what Bhagavan would actually have said. So I'll just read how it's been recorded. Well, this is an English translation of the Tamil, but Sadhu Om had recorded in the Partha Sri, of the Tamil original of the Partha Sri Ramana. What Bhagavan himself said about this experience was, when that, all right, death has come. What is death? What is dying? This body is going to die. Let it die. Resolving thus, closing the lips tightly, remaining like a corpse without speech and breath, when observed, what appeared clearly within was as follows. This body has died. Now it will be taken to the cremation ground and burnt. It will become ashes. All right. But with the destruction of this body, am I also destroyed? Is this body I? Although this body lies as a corpse, devoid of speech and breath, I certainly exist without being obstructed in the least by this death. My being continues to shine clearly without any obstruction. I think this, when Bhagavan said, my being continues to shine clearly, is what Viva Narasimha Swami said, I feel the full force of my personality. Bhagavan wasn't talking about his personality, he's talking about his very being, what he actually is. So my being continues to shine clearly without any obstruction. Therefore, this body which dies is not I. I am only the indestructible I. Among all things, I alone am the real substance. As for this body, it is subject to death. I who transcend the body am what lives eternally. Even this death that has come cannot touch me. Thus it shone plainly. With that, the fear of death that had risen in the beginning disappeared, never to return. All this was experienced only as direct awareness, as pratyaksha, not as mere thoughts. From that time, my being awareness, Satchit, which transcended the body, has always continued as the one single nature. And then Sadhu Om continues, such were his words. Although in later times Bhagavan on many occasions gave us an account of the foregoing, he always insisted, all this happened in a split second as direct experience without any activity of mind or speech. So Bhagavan is putting in words, like trying to explain what became clear to him. So what became clear to him is that his being was ever shining, not that the full force of his personality or the voice of I. This is a very crude understanding of what Bhagavan, the very subtle experience that Bhagavan was explaining there. Even say experience implies there's an experience there. It's beyond, I mean, it's not one thing experiencing another thing. It is Atma-vichara. It's a self-experience, clearly being aware of himself as that pure awareness I am. So these words are they're not Bhagavan's own words. They're what someone has how someone understood what Bhagavan said. But what Bhagavan said was something much deeper and much subtler.
Thank you very much.
Is that helpful?
Yes, yes. We must be very careful what we read because so much.
Well, yeah, this is the problem with all. I mean, so many things have been recorded of that incidents in Bhagavan's life, and also Bhagavan's answers to questions have been recorded. But many of these things, firstly, as I say, Bhagavan spoke in Tamil. Often it was recorded in English, so it's not even the actual words Bhagavan said. But it's gone through the filter of, firstly, people hear things and then later record it. So first it's gone through the filter of their memory. It's also gone through the filter of their understanding. If you listen to a subject being talked about, what you will take away from it is what you understood. If you don't understand it clearly, your memory of it that is your poor understanding will color your memory. So first it goes through the filter of understanding, then through the filter of memory, then through the filter of translation. So it's very far removed from what actually happened.
Right.
Sadhu Om explained very nicely about incidents in Bhagavan's lifetime, incidents in Bhagavan's life, but it also applies to a teaching. That is, we all see Bhagavan. That is what attracts us to Bhagavan is our own self. Because Bhagavan is our own self, we are all naturally attracted to him. But how we see him we recognize him as our own self, but at the same time we see him through the filter of our mind. Just like because we don't know what we actually are, we don't know what Bhagavan actually is. So just like we are misperceiving ourselves, taking ourselves to be this person, we all to a greater or lesser extent misperceive Bhagavan. So when people, how well anyone can understand Bhagavan depends upon the purity of their mind. Through a pure mind, the real nature of Bhagavan, the real nature of his teachings will shine more clearly. Through a less pure mind, it will shine less clearly. So when we hear stories about Bhagavan, when I came to Tiruvannamalai in 1976, there were still many old devotees of Bhagavan, people who had lived with Bhagavan for 20, 30, 40 years, were still there in those days. Sometimes I would hear a story from one person, and later when I'm talking to another person, I will mention that, I will mention what I heard from someone else. And they say, no, I was there. Wasn't like that. So two people who were both there at the time, both giving very different accounts of the same incident. So everyone is seeing Bhagavan imperfectly. If we want, that is the people whose account we can rely on are people like Murugan and Sadhu Om, who were totally surrendered to Bhagavan, who were totally pure. So it wasn't being filtered through a mind clouded with vasanas like ours. So, but many of the accounts of the stories of Bhagavan's life and the accounts of his teachings, his oral teachings, and also many of the translations, we can see how poorly Bhagavan's own written words have been translated in so many books. So we have to, whatever we read, we need to read with we need to be very, very cautious in does it really tally with what Bhagavan taught?
Yes, and so going within is a very different experience for everybody. We've all got to peel off all these different layers of culture, etc., etc. And that's why it takes so long, I guess.
Yeah. Well, going within is the same, but as we're going within, as you say, as we're peeling off the different layers, there's so many layers of dirt within us. We have to cut through all that. But though there's so many layers of dirt, so many Vishaya vasanas within us, shining through all of these constantly is that light of grace that ever shining in our heart as our own being, I am. That is what we need to cling to, and everything else will drop off. To the extent to which we cling to that, other things will drop off. Because all these impurities are not clinging to us. We are holding on to them. So if we hold on to our eternally pure being, all the impurities will drop off of their own accord. And then only will we know Bhagavan as Bhagavan knew himself. We will know him by being him.
Thank you very much. That clears that up. I shall read things with a lot more discretion.
Yes.
Says, so the question is, recently I have been searching various sources in an effort to become clearer in a practical step-by-step fashion about the practical side of the practice of Atma-vichara. This led me to your answer to a question on Thursday, the 16th of April 2009, called How to Start Practicing Atma-vichara. In this answer, you mention, in this entangled mixture, I am this body, quotation marks, the only real element is our fundamental consciousness, I am. The other element, this body, is merely an imagination, and hence it is created only by our act of thinking. When we do not think anything, as in deep sleep, this body does not exist, just as a dream body does not exist when we are not dreaming. The question I have is in relation to the statement, when we do not think anything, as in deep sleep, this body does not exist. How can this be true? When this mind goes into deep sleep, this body is lying in bed throughout the process. This can be easily verified. When my little granddaughter goes into a deep sleep, her body is still there. I can witness it. I can tell by the stillness of her body that she is in deep sleep. There is a similar question about the world. When I go into deep sleep, it disappears for me. However, it still exists for others while I am sleeping. Also, I can ask, what happened while I slept? And I'm able to find out. I appreciate that I and you are not being used in the true sense, but do not the body and the world have an existence independent of a person being in sleep or realized?
Right. Okay. This is Bhagavan often said this, that the body and world do not exist in sleep, and people often objected, just as this questioner is objecting. How can it be so that the body and world I may not be aware of the body and world, but it certainly existed. This is all because these questions arise because we are so accustomed to taking this world to be real, taking the world to have an existence independent of our perception of it. We assume that the body and world exist even when we're not aware of them. But Bhagavan often used to say in answer to this, if the body and world exist in your sleep, why don't they why do you have to wait till waking to verify that they exist? Why are you not aware of their existence in sleep? That is, we are clearly aware of our own being in sleep, but we are not aware of the body or world. What do we have to infer from that? If the body and world actually existed, we should be aware of them. In the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, there are a series of verses in which it is said that it is said, in sleep nothing is seen because there is nothing to be seen. In sleep nothing is heard because there's nothing to be heard. In sleep nothing is tasted because there's nothing to be tasted. In other words, it's affirming exactly what Bhagavan affirmed. The reason we are not aware of the body and world in sleep is because the body and world do not exist. So how can we understand this? That is, we need to go deeper into Bhagavan's teaching. According to Bhagavan, what we now take to be the waking state is actually just a dream. We don't, when we wake up from a dream, we don't think what's happening in the dream world. We know that as soon as we wake up from a dream, we recognize that it was just a mental fabrication. So all the people and all the events in that dream, we know they existed in our own mind. They have no existence independent of our mind. So we're not curious to where are all my friends that I met in sleep, where are they now? You say it's that I met in my dream. We know they all completely fabrication of our mind. If we ask, supposing we're having this discussion in a dream, in a dream, if you ask someone, when I'm asleep, do you see my body? They will say, yes, of course we see your body when you're asleep. And does this world continue to exist when I'm asleep? Yes, they'll tell you. But those who tell you that are all part of the dream world. So when you wake up from dream, you don't think, or just because someone told me in dream that the dream world, that world that I then took to be the real, to be this waking world. I don't, just because they said this world exists even when I'm not aware of it, I don't suppose it's the case now. That is, we know whatever we experience in a dream had no existence at all, independent of our awareness of it. If we met a friend in our dream, we don't go and meet our friend in the waking state and talk about and say, oh, we had a nice time in that dream, didn't we? No, the friend obviously, the friend we saw in the dream was only in our own mind. Just like that, this, according to Bhagavan, this waking state is just a dream. So when we are not aware of it, it does not exist. So neither the body nor the world exist when we are not aware of them. They have no existence independent of our perception of it. If we doubt this, we can consider very carefully, is there anything that we experience in this waking state that we could not experience in a dream? Obviously, whatever we experience in the waking state, we could equally well experience in a dream. When such is the case, what evidence do we have that we are not now dreaming? According to Bhagavan, the whole of our life, that is the life of this present body that we take ourselves to be, the whole of this life is one long dream. So all our childhood memories and our memories of our youth and all the things that have happened in our life, it's all just one long dream. And this dream is interrupted by periods of sleep. And the sleep is interrupted by dreams. So the dreams we have at night are dreams within a dream. Because they're dreams within this dream, we still have the same identity. We still take ourselves to be the person we now take ourselves to be. We still have, in dreams, we may have memories about our childhood and so on. Because when we're dreaming, it seems to us that it's just a continuity of this waking state. But just like so long as we're dreaming, the dream world seems to be real. Why does the dream world seem to be real? Because in dream, we identify ourselves with a dream body. What is actually real is only ourself. When we take ourselves to be a body, that body seems to be real. Because if I'm real and this body is me, therefore the body is real. So we superimpose our own reality upon whatever body we take ourselves to be. And since that body is a part of a world, the whole world seems to be real. So it's our own reality that we have superimposed upon the body and consequently have superimposed upon the world. So long as we are dreaming, the dream world seems to be real. But as soon as we wake up from a dream, our identification with that dream body is severed and is switched to this body. And as soon as as soon as we wake up, we once recognize, oh, that wasn't real. It was just a dream. It seemed to be real so long as we took that dream body to be ourselves. When our identification switches from that dream body to this dream body, the dream world no longer seems to be real. So this indicates what is common to waking and dream is ourself. We are the common factor. So we are what gave reality to the dream body and dream world. So long as we are dreaming, we are what it gives a seeming reality to this present body and this present world, so long as we're in the waking state. But none of these things are real. What is actually real is only ourself. As we will know if we investigate ourselves and merge back into our own being, then it will be clear that everything else is just a mental fabrication. In those days, I wrote imagination. I nowadays don't use the word imagination because imagination tends to imply something more superficial. The term in Sanskrit is manokarpana, a mental fabrication. So I think fabrication is a better word than imagination, because imagination suggests something more superficial. So for example, in the 7th paragraph of Nana, Bhagavan says, Yatatamai uludu Atma-swarupa mondre. What actually exists is only Atma-swarupa. Atma-swarupa, swarupa literally means own form. So it means, it's often translated as real nature. But so Atma-swarupa is the real nature of ourself. But what it implies is, what swarupa implies is what we actually are. That is what we actually are. So what we actually are alone is what actually exists. And then he goes on in the next sentence to say, the world, soul, and God are karpane. They're fabrications in it, like the silver in the mother of pearl. There's no silver in the mother of pearl, but it has the appearance of silveriness. Likewise, there's body. When Bhagavan talks about God there, he's talking about God as something seemingly separate from ourselves. That seemingly separate God and this world and the jiva, what we take ourselves, this ego, all share the same level. I mean, they're all equally unreal, but they all are equally seemingly real. But according to them, they're all they're all fabrication. And he also says that they come into being simultaneously and they cease to exist simultaneously. So they come into being in waking and dream, they cease to exist in sleep. And finally, he says, it's swarupa, what we actually are. That alone is God. That alone is the world. That alone is I. In other words, it is the one swarupa that appears as all these many things. So, as he says elsewhere, for example, in verse 13 of Uludunapadu, he says, Jnanamam tane me. Oneself who is awareness alone is real. Awareness of manyness, of multiplicity, is ignorance. So what actually exists is only one. That one is us. We are that one. That alone is what is real. That alone is what actually exists. But when we know ourselves as all these many things, that is ignorance. But even that, he goes on to say, even that ignorance doesn't exist independent of ourself, who alone are real. And then he gives an analogy. The many ornaments are unreal. Do they exist as other than the gold? So when we see many ornaments, there seem to be many things, but actually in substance, they're all one. They're all just gold in different shapes. So what is real is the substance, the pure being awareness that we actually are. That is the substance, the vastu, the puddle. Everything else, all these phenomena, all these myriad phenomena, these are nothing but forms. The substance of all these forms is the one satchit, the one being awareness that we actually are. So the substance is real, the forms are unreal. But what today is a gold bangle, tomorrow it can be melted and made into a gold ring or a necklace or something. So the forms are impermanent and ever-changing, but underlying substance is real. Of course, even gold is not real. The gold can also be broken down, but the ultimate substance, the one real substance, that is pure being awareness. That is what we are. That alone is what is real. Everything else is a manokarpana, a mental fabrication. As Bhagavan says in verse 26 of Ulunapadu, if ego comes into existence, everything comes into existence. If ego doesn't exist, everything doesn't exist. Why does he say that? Because everything, meaning all phenomena, exist only in the view of ego. So it's only when we rise as ego in waking and dream that phenomena seem to exist. When we do not rise as ego, no phenomena seem to exist, as we can see from our experience in sleep. And then he goes on to say, Ahandeye yavamam, ego itself is everything. Therefore, investigating what this ego is giving up everything. Because if we investigate ego, ego will cease to exist, and everything else will cease to exist along with it. And what will then remain is what is ever existing, right? The eternal Satchidananda that we always actually are.
Well, Michael, just to sort of expand on this a little bit, just to understand this a bit further. This idea, of course, of dreams within dreams, sort of like the movie Inception, is how we would look at it in terms of life being the longer dream, sort of for what we call a lifetime, and then the periods of dream which we have within it being the sort of dream within the dream. And then, of course, we have deep sleep and so on, these three states. Now, these are so it is as if one dream sort of encompasses, the sort of larger dream of a lifetime encompasses these sort of more periodic or briefer dreams or
Yeah.
whatever, which sort
Yeah.
of are more momentary throughout this longer dream. But at the same time, in a more at a deeper level, each of these states, in fact, correspond to the different sheaths, really, to the koshas, isn't it? I think.
Well,
I mean, the sense.
that's one way in which it's explained, but Bhagavan didn't really explain that. That is, it very different levels of explanation are given in Vedanta and even within Advaita to suit people of different levels of understanding. So it is often said this in this waking state we have the stula sarira, the gross body. In dream it's the subtle body. And in sleep, it is the causal body, the karana sarira. But Bhagavan said every bit as physical as this body seems to be, the dream body seems to be every bit as physical. So Bhagavan said all these five sheaths come together. In verse 5 of Uludnabdi, he says, Urul Panchakosa Uru. The body is a form of five sheaths. Therefore, all five are included in the term body. So in sleep, we have what seems to be a gross body, and we have the prana, and we have a mind, and we have an intellect, and we have a will. So all the five sheaths are there experienced in dream as much as in the waking state. And in sleep, there's no body experienced at all. All that actually shines in sleep is the fundamental awareness of our own being, I am. So Satchit alone remains, because according to Bhagavan, all these five sheaths exist only in the view of ego. So without ego, there's no five sheaths. So, but because people ask questions about sleep, if there's nothing in sleep, if all these cease to exist in sleep, then how do we come out of sleep again? Then they said it all remains in a seed form, and that seed form is Karana Sarira. This is explanations given to satisfy people who are not going deeper into the subject. But even the explanation to say that the Karana Sarira remains in sleep is unsatisfactory, because if the Karana Sarira remains in sleep, then what evidence do we have that we are anything other than that Karana Sarira? The whole point of the analysis of the three states is to show that we are that which alone exists in sleep. What alone exists in sleep is the pure awareness I am. So sometimes different explanations clash. So if we say that the Karana Sarira, which is nothing but the bundle of vasanas, if they remain in sleep, then we can say, okay, that is what we actually are. But the Karana Sarira consists of the vasanas. The vasanas are whose vasanas? They're ego's vasanas. So how can ego's vasanas remain in the absence of ego? So if the Karana Sarira remains, then you have to say ego remains. If ego remains, then it all becomes a confusion. So Bhagavan makes it very, very simple. This sun shines in sleep is only pure Satchit. It's only when ego rises that the five sheaths seem to exist, because ego rises, projects the five sheaths, and identifies them as I, whether in waking or in dream. So waking and dream, another point, though the dreams we have at night are dreams within a dream, that doesn't mean they're any less, or that this dream is any more real than those. The whole point of the teaching of Advaita, that this is a dream, is to show that this waking state is in no way any more real than dream. Though it may seem to be longer, it is actually no more real. And Bhagavan says in Guru Vācaka Kōvai, even to say this waking state is longer and dream is shorter, even that is not entirely true, because long or short, it all depends upon the perspective. When we're dreaming, it doesn't seem to be a short state, because in dream we have memories. If someone asks us, what school did you go to? Who were your parents? All these things. We can recall our childhood in dream. So while we're dreaming, that dream seems to be a long state. It seems to be part of a long state. So all this time and everything, it's the mind, it's ego alone that gives seeming reality to time, to space, to everything.
So, the ego and hence the world do arise moment to moment, even while we're waking, isn't it? I mean,
yes.
even sort of in between thoughts, in between breaths, so to speak.
Sometimes Bhagavan sometimes gave the analogy of the frames in a
movie.
in a film reel. Because of the speed at which they're projected, it seems to be a continuous picture. Likewise, this world is also frame is projected.
And the background behind it, the screen, is that in which, so to speak, it's arising moment to moment, whether it's in waking or in dream, and so on. The only thing which I was wondering about here is that we could really say, I mean, because dream and, for example, we're sort of this is now from the relative practical point of view of the individual practitioner, when we're making a degree of effort, cooperating with grace and so on. We are the way in which a dream, or what we call a dream normally, is constituted and what can be done in a dream is not exactly the same as what can be done in the waking state. Even so, they're in a sense different types of dreams. For example, in dreams, say for example, people do dream yoga, or they, in certain traditions, or they, they have lucid dreaming and so on. They can undertake a lot of things like jumping over mountains, or people have these sort of things of the astral body. They can go across the universe, even in certain states of meditation and so on, which is also another state, a kind of state. So in a sense, these are somewhat differently fabricated. It's still space, time, and so on, the same kinds of constituents of will and so on, but their features are not exactly the same, in the sense that they all seem real, but they're just very sort of subtly different kinds of reality. Maybe this is not important, but it's just that in terms of people practicing, it comes up that, look, it's not exactly the same. And I think it's been argued quite effectively. They're not exactly the same, but they're slightly differently characterized, but they're still dreams and still seem real, but are not real.
Bhagavan explained these seeming differences very simply. He said, our present waking state, when we're in a normal state of mind, it appears to be very solid and consistent. Now I'm talking with Shalini. You don't suddenly become some other person, which does happen sometimes in dream. You're talking to someone, and you were talking to A, and you're suddenly the person A has become B, or you're in one place and suddenly you find you're in another place. This type of thing we often find happening in dream. What Bhagavan said about this is, It depends upon the abhimana, the abhimana, the strength of the abhimana. Now we are very strongly attached to this body, so that gives a seeming stability, a seeming continuity to this waking state. So things seem to be happening in a regular way. Things are obeying the laws of physics and so on. This is all because of the strength of of our abhimana, of our attachment to this body, our identification with the body. When we dream at night, some dreams are as seemingly solid and consistent as this, but some dreams are more fleeting. You're talking to one person, it suddenly becomes another person. You're in one place, you're suddenly finding. So everything it's very much in a flux. That is because we are less strongly attached to that dream body. So in dream, if you try to practice self-attentiveness in dream, doesn't always work, but in many dreams, if you suddenly remember, oh, let me turn my attention to myself, once you wake up, because your identification with that dream body is very is a feeble identification, so it's easily broken by a little bit of self-attentiveness. So this is why there are qualitative differences between different dreams. Some dreams seem more solid and more when we view them from the perspective of this waking state, they seem more like waking. Some seem more they make no sense at all. Everything is inconsistent, though they seem very real while we were experiencing them. So it's all to do with the strength of the attachment to the body. And Bhagavan said, this is why in some sastras it is said, the waking state is a fully blossomed state of ego, and dream is a half-blossomed state of ego. It's referring to this qualitative difference, but the substance is the same. There's absolutely no difference substantively between waking and dream. It's a qualitative difference. If, for example, if you watch a Charlie Chaplin film and compare it with modern film, there's obviously a vast difference in quality. In terms of the quality of the cinematography and everything, but they're both equally films. We can't say, oh, modern films are more real, Charlie Chaplin films weren't real. They're all equally real. It's just the quality, the difference it lies in the quality, not in the actual substance of the dream. Both are equally mental. And people say, oh, this waking state is so consistent, but actually it's not always so. Supposing you're very, very tired, we find ourselves in a state where we have difficulty holding on to this waking state. So it keeps on, it's like it's dissolving before our eyes almost. Or if a person is drunk, their experience of a waking state is very different to the experience of a sober person. So these are all to do with, these differences exist only in the mind. There's no substantive difference between waking and dream. Just like Bhagavan said about to say that waking is long and dream is short, that's a qualitative difference. It's not a substantive difference, because it's only from depending on your perspective that you say one is long and one is short. While we're dreaming, we don't think dream is. If in dream, we'd also say, see, this waking state is long, and dreams we have at night are short, because in the dream we think we are awake. We seem to be awake. But the bottom line is, it's all a mental fabrication. Just like the dream world does not in any way exist independent of our perception of it, this so-called waking world does not exist independent of our perception of it. This is what is called Drishti Shrishti Vada. But the world is created just, but that is the creation of world and perception of the world are the same thing.
Well, in all of these cases, whether it's waking or the different dreams, or even certain kinds of deep meditative states, in which we might have certain visions and so on, or many things might arise. The ego is rising up, of course, whenever there are these forms, and it's all about, and what differs is the quality of grasping forms, which is instantiated as a world and myself. And that quality of grasping is the identification. It's what gives that sense of reality or being to each of these states, or less real, what real. And that grasping itself is the coming into existence of certain characteristics of space and time, like sort of less duration, more duration, etc., etc. Having the ability to jump over mountains and travel across space, or just being able to just crawl along on a dense planet Earth and that kind of thing. Okay. We'll move on to the
question on this.
It's all Maya. To put it simply, it's all the tricks of the mind.
Yeah. The reason I was sort of delving on a little bit is because sort of when we're looking into ourselves, turning within, then in a sense, a degree of, when we take the different states seriously, in the sense that there is a reality to the deep sleep state and so on, and when we're rising from it, there is still a bit of a flicker of that, and it's a bit easier to just merge a little bit back within and so on, and the dream and so on. Sort of the idea of different kinds of grasping or identification in each of these states, I think it can sometimes be a little helpful, not necessarily always, with delving within, with sort of knowing ourselves a bit better. I'm not sure if this is making a lot of sense.
Well, I think it's what's most important is to recognize that what we essentially are is just that satchit, that awareness of being, that awareness I am, and that is what is constant through all three states. If we recognize the shining of that being awareness I am in sleep, that helps us a lot in waking or dream to hold on to our being. So to think deeply about these three states is very, very helpful in this practice of self-investigation, because the only thing that is the only continuity through these three states is our own being, because everything that appears and disappears in waking and dream, that none of those things exist in sleep. In sleep, all that exists and shines is I am, our own being. So essentially there are just two states. There's the state of pure being Satchit, and the state of Satchit plus all these other things. All these other things is what we call waking or dream. The state of mere Satchit is what we call sleep. So what is the defect in sleep? The only defect in sleep is from the perspective of the ego in the waking state or dream state. We seem to have come out of sleep. So we have to say sleep is an imperfect state. It's a temporary state. But it appears imperfect, appears temporary only from the perspective of the mind in waking dream. That's why Bhagavan said, when we know what we actually are, sleep will be found to be nothing but turiya, the so-called fourth state, which is the eternal state, the only real state.
We'll move on to the next question.
Yes.
There's a question. Sanjay, are you here?
I have made my question more crisp. In the email, it was a long question, but the essence of the question is, sir, do our vasanas, desires, and attachments belong to ego, or do our vasanas, desires, and attachments belong to the person we seem to be?
They belong to ego. This person we seem to be is a projection of our vasanas. Vasanas, that is the vasanas, the Vishaya vasanas, they are the seeds that give rise to Vishayas. Vishayas means objects or phenomena. So all objects or phenomena are nothing but a sprouted form of our Vishaya vasanas. So this whole world is a sprouted form of our Vishaya vasanas. As Bhagavan said, the Vishaya vasanas are like the images on the film reel. They're projected outside of the world. And the world, of course, includes this body and all the five sheaths. So, and the body and the five sheaths are what constitute the person we take ourselves to be. So it all belongs only to ego. But because as ego we take ourselves to be this person, it seems that I as Sanjay or I as Michael have certain such vasanas, have certain such desires, have certain such attachments.
So,
But actually those desires and attachments are only ego. The person we take ourselves to be is Jada. It's just that these five sheaths all are Jada. They're all devoid of awareness. It's ego alone, but they seem to be sentient because we as ego identify ourselves as this bundle of five sheaths, this person we take ourselves to be.
So my confusion over here is, since these vasanas, desires, and attachments are part of the Panch Koshas, that is the Anandamaya Kosha,
Yeah.
and that Anandamaya Kosha belongs to the person. So
No,
logically,
it doesn't belong to the person. It's the innermost part. It's the core of the person, we can say, the heart of the person. But it is not and the person is an expansion of those vasanas. But the vasanas belong to ego. It's ego who says, I am this person. Ego who says, I have this desire, I like this, I dislike that, I want this, I don't want that.
sir, ego
This is
word,
mine, this is yours. All this it's all ego only. Ego is the only sentient element in all of this.
sir, could we say this way, that ego is identifying with the desires and attachment which are a part of Panchakosha, because that desires and attachments are not the ego, they are a part of the person, because that person is the...
But remember, it is also called the Karana Sarira. It's the causal. It's what causes everything else. And so what ego takes with it from one dream to another, from one life to another, it takes its vasanas with it.
That's true, sir. But then if we say that the vasanas are part of the Panchakosha, in that sense it's different to ego.
It's different to ego, but it belongs to ego. That is, ego is not the Vishaya vasanas, but it's the nature of ego to have Vishaya vasanas. Over time, your vasanas may change. Some vasanas will get stronger, some will get weaker. But the vasanas are inclinations. Whose inclinations are they? Who is inclined to like this and to dislike that?
Yes, sir.
So it's all only ego. Ego is the root.
Yes. So what you say is true, sir. But conceptually, it feels that they belong to the person. Conceptually.
Yeah, but it's because of our very strong identification with this person, we fail to distinguish ourselves as ego from all these upadhis that we take ourselves to be. If we can distinguish ego from all these things, ego ceases to exist, because ego is only ego is not chit and it's not jada. It is the chit jada granti. It's the knot that is formed by the entanglement of these.
But sir, in that Anandamaya Kosha, the things it contained in that Anandamaya Kosha, that seems distinct from ego, sir, because
it is distinct from ego, but
yes.
It is the nature of ego to have vasanas. We are not vasanas. As I say, over time vasanas can change. Some vasanas get stronger, some get weaker. Eventually, certain vasanas may die off, and be replaced by other vasanas. But the one whose vasanas they are, that is what the continuity. That is ego.
So the person affects the vasanas, means the person is like a prism through which the vasanas flow out. He's like a prism.
Yeah, yes, but the person has no existence independent of the vasanas. The person is an expansion of the vasanas.
So like over there, it's much more useful to understand it as Karana Sarira, the vasanas.
That's why it's called Karana Sarira.
More than a Panch Kosha analysis, the Karana Sarira analysis makes more sense here.
Well, yes, it depends how you want to think of it, but it's all essentially the same. I mean, that's why it's conceptually, we take it as the innermost core, the innermost sheath.
Innermost sheath. Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir.
We can move on to the questions from the chat box now. Bruce, I don't think, I think your hand is still raised. I think that's just from
Yeah,
before.
it was just a comment on what Sanjay was talking about.
All right.
If you want me to comment, I will. If not, it's okay.
Yeah, go. Yeah, please.
I think that insentience persists only as long as ego identification persists.
Yes,
Does that make sense?
all insentient things, including the vasanas, exist
Exactly.
only in the view of ego.
Exactly.
As
So
Bhagavan
that
says, if ego comes into existence, everything comes into existence. If ego is not, everything is not.
Move on to the questions from the chat box. The first one is I am both the manifested and the unmanifested? If so, the manifested, including thoughts, I suppose the mind body is distracted by or identifies with them. When practicing I am, all the attention is pulled from the manifested, and there is awareness only which encapsulates the manifested in it. But what about the unmanifested? What is it, and how is one supposed to merge that into awareness?
I think manifested and unmanifested is rather confusing. That is in Sankhya and other forms of philosophy, they talk a lot about the vyakta and avyakta, the manifest and the unmanifest. In Advaita, there's only one thing that exists. That is I am, our being. But when we rise as ego, we see that one as many. The many is not a manifestation of the one, it's an appearance. And there can't be an appearance without one to whom it appears. To whom does it all appear? Only to ego. So I am is before any, I mean, I am is what is eternal. I am doesn't appear or disappear. It's constant. It's the one underlying reality. It's the ground, the adhisthana, the adhara. So that's the fundamental reality. Everything else appears and disappears. Whatever appears and disappears is not real. It is just an appearance. Only what exists always is real. And what exists always is only I am. So once we bring in manifestation and unmanifested, conceptually it rather confuses the matter. We can say I am is ever manifest. It doesn't need to manifest. But one thing that is ever obvious, ever clearly shining, is I am. Everything else but appears and disappears, and therefore is unreal. But I mean, this is a fundamental principle of Advaita, is what is called Vivartavada. Vivarta means a false appearance, an illusory appearance, because in other interpretations of Vedanta, they are what are called Parinamavada. But Brahman has become all this. But Advaita says, no, Brahman doesn't become anything. Brahman is pure being. There's no becoming for Brahman. So it's all just it's an illusory appearance. So that's one of the fundamental principles of Advaita. And with different ways of understanding Advaita, I mean, people have different understanding, but if you do not accept that this is all just an illusory appearance, then it's some other system of philosophy. It's not Advaita. Bhagavan agrees, yes, it's all a false appearance, but to whom does it appear? Bhagavan is very, very practical. We can talk, I mean, we can go on talking philosophy forever, but if we say it's all an appearance, then to whom does it appear? Even if we say it's real, even if we say it's a manifestation, to whom does it appear? Who sees it all? That Bhagavan is always turning our attention back to ourselves. So instead of arguing about whether this is real or unreal, whether it's appearance or it's manifestation or whatever, who is aware of all this? In whose view do all these things seem to exist? That way we turn our attention back and we merge back into the heart. And when we merge, everything else, according to Bhagavan, everything else merges with us. As he says in the final paragraph of Nana, if oneself rises, everything rises. If oneself subsides, everything subsides. So if we want to be free from all trouble, all we need to do is to subside. Subside means to sink back into our being and to be as we actually are. That is Bhagavan's path. And in that state, all the different philosophies, different beliefs and religions and philosophies and sciences all dissolve there. Because all exist only in the view of ego. That's why he says in the second and third verses of Ullugunapadu, all this disputing about whether the world is real or unreal, whether it's happiness or unhappiness, whether it's consciousness or unconsciousness, all exist. All these disputes are only so long as ego lasts. The state that is free of ego is agreeable to all.
The next question is, what spiritual practices did Bhagavan do in his previous lives to merit the ability to know his self in that very first encounter with the fear of death? Was it by bhakti or jnana? Thank you, Michael.
If we understand Bhagavan's teachings correctly, bhakti and jnana are inseparable. Jnana is the flowering of bhakti. Bhakti is the heart of jnana. That is, in order to know and to be what we actually are, requires all-consuming love. So there can't, Bhagavan often said, bhakti is the mother of jnana. Without bhakti, there can't be jnana. But the jnana is as I say, it's the blossoming, it's the fullness of bhakti. So essentially, they're the same path. At first, when we're completely devoid of any clarity, we take God to be something other than ourselves. And so the Bhakti Marga begins with worshipping God as other, as a name or form or whatever. But as we go deeper in the path of bhakti, the mind gets purified and it becomes clear that God cannot be something other than ourselves. If God were other than ourselves, then he becomes an object. How can God be an object? He's the reality of the subject. God is infinite. So if I am other than God, that limits God. God is no longer infinite. So since God is infinite, nothing can be other than him. So he is our own reality. He's what we actually are. So the mature stage of bhakti, of the path of bhakti, is what is called the path of jnana, turning our attention within to merge back into our being. That is surrender. Attending to ourself is surrendering ourself, because to the extent to which we attend to ourself, we as ego subside, and that is the surrender of ourself. So Atma-samapanam, surrender of ourself, it can become complete only by means of Atma-vichara. So they're not two different paths.
Sorry,
I mean, we
Michael,
can see.
I meant to ask, how did he know with the at the very first encounter that this is it? So he must have done some great tapas in his previous life. So my question mainly was to know what spiritual practice did he do in his previous life, as he himself indicated.
His bhakti must have been very mature, and very mature bhakti is what is called jnana. So it's in verse 7 of Arunachal Bhagavan says, if all these elements and everything that is made of these elements are not other than you, who is this I who rises as another? Come out and plant your feet on his head. So it's so clear if we read Arunachal Stuti Panchakam how the bhakti and jnana are inseparably intertwined. And we can see the bhakti manifest. Why, when Bhagavan read the Periyapuranam, it had such an impact upon him. It's because the bhakti was so, I mean, the bhakti was already there so strongly in his heart. But when he read the Periyapuranam, it's not about jnana, it's about the devotion for Shiva as an external god. But the Anya Bhava and the Ananya Bhava are so closely linked. That's why Bhagavan sang in praise of the outward form of Arunachal, but he's constantly saying this Arunachal who's shining in the heart as the destroyer of ego. So the distinction between the Anya Bhava and the Ananya Bhava, as we go deeper into the Ananya Bhava, the distinction dissolves.
Thank you. Yes. So it is bhakti which is one.
Bhakti is, Bhagavan himself said, bhakti is the mother of jnana. How can there be jnana without bhakti?
Yes. Correct.
Because the nature of the mind is to have so many likes and dislikes, desires, attachments, and everything. This is the outward going mind. In order to, that priya aspect has to be focused into one. At first, it's focused on one external name and form of God. But even then, so long as there's Anya Bhakti, there's devotion for another, you've got two there. You've got the devotee and the Lord. So even that has to become one. So it's all, the love has to, so long as we take God to be other than ourselves, our love is divided between ourselves and God. So only when we recognize God as our own being does the love focus into one.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes.
As
Yes.
Bhagavan says beautifully, Ambu Vilalipol, Amburuvunilene, Ambai Karitarala. Like ice in water, melt me as love in you, the form of love.
Mm. Mm. Thank you.
That is jnana.
Thank you very much. Mhm. Bhakti is easier anyway.
Is it?
Much, much.
Really?
Yes, for me, bhakti is the only way.
When you say bhakti, you're distinguishing bhakti from jnana.
Hmm. Yes, but
But the
bhakti
mature,
only brings us to
the
jnana.
mature bhakti is itself jnana.
I never have thought of jnana bringing you to bhakti, but bhakti brings us to jnana.
Yes, yes. That's why
Yes.
Bhagavan said, he didn't say jnana is the mother of bhakti. He said
No.
bhakti is the mother of
Yes,
jnana.
correct. Yes. Yes. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Right.
The next question. The key to success on this path, as these verses call out, is love. Love for Arunachala Ramana and vigilant attention to oneself above all else. 7 years ago, when I began on the path, I felt immense love for Arunachala and Bhagavan. Now I have reached a point where that love has vanished completely. I feel stone-hearted and utterly unworthy. Yet deep down, I sense Bhagavan hasn't abandoned me. Practice feels like the only way forward, but I'm lost without love for Bhagavan or Arunachala.
That is when we follow this spiritual path, as Bhagavan said, all that is inside has to come out. So it's sometimes called the churning of the nadis. That's a metaphorical way of saying everything that's inside has to be churned and come up to the surface. And in order, that is, if the vasanas don't rise up to the surface, how can we overcome them? That is, in sleep, we can't overcome vasanas. As Bhagavan said, even in Nirvikalpa Samadhi, we can't overcome vasanas. It's only when the vasanas are allowed to rise to the surface of our mind, then we have a choice. Do we follow the Vishaya vasanas or do we hold on to our being? And by holding on to our being, the Vishaya vasanas lose their strength. So as a result of our bhakti, so much dirt is churned out from within, and sometimes we feel overwhelmed by it. Sometimes we feel, I have no bhakti at all. But we need to, Bhagavan himself sings, Nesa milenakun ase katane mosanche adaralaranachala. In me who is devoid of love, you arouse desire for you. Do not cheat me, do not disappoint me. So the more we go deep in this spiritual path, the more we recognize how truly devoid of bhakti we are. That is, if we really understood what Bhagavan has taught, we would not want anything other than to hold on to our own being and lose ourselves in that, because that is we're all seeking happiness. There's no happiness in other things. Happiness is our own nature. So if we really understood that, our mind wouldn't be going out. The fact that our mind is still going outwards means we still got so much dirt inside, so much vasanas are still there, pulling our, that is, not, we can't even say pulling our mind, we have so much inclination to go outwards, to experience things other than ourselves. So there's a battle going on in our own will, as Bhagavan said, between the Sat Vasana and the Vishaya Vasanas. This is the eternal battle between good and evil, the battle that is described in the Puranas and the Ityasas as the Devasura Yuddha, the warfare between the gods and the demons. The gods are Satvasana, the demons are all the Vishaya Vasanas. So we have to go through all this. We have to, but in order to go through this, the abhyasa, the practice, holding on to self-attentiveness is so important. If we feel we have no bhakti, Why are we concerned about that? The very fact that we're concerned about our lack of bhakti shows at least the seed of bhakti is there. So let us continue trying our best to follow this path of self-investigation and self-surrender that Bhagavan has taught us. Whatever filthy vasanas may arise from within, and if we're honest with ourselves, we all have so many vasanas, so many desires, attachments, likes, dislikes, and so on. We've got to let all these come to the surface in order not to be swayed by them, but to continue holding firmly to Bhagavan, who is ever shining in our heart as our own being, I am. That is the only way.
And just finish the last one or two questions. The next question is, it's basically to do with the question on dream and waking, and I think it simply confirms and reiterates what was said, which is, so whether in waking or the dream state, identification is the primary error.
Yes, absolutely.
And the next question is, well, it's sort of questions within questions, but here it goes. Why does ego come into existence? Why do we rise as ego to struggle and afterwards to come out of ego in order to return to God? Why? Would it not have been much more easy just to stay and reside in God? Why do we come to exist as ego and struggle in this dream just to come back to our nature, that is our existence as God? Would it not have been much more easy just to reside in our pure nature? What is the purpose of this dream? It's logic. Why does God want this dream?
Okay, well, firstly, God doesn't want it. God is grace. God wants us to put an end to this dream. We're dreaming because we want to dream. When people ask this question to Bhagavan, why does this ego rise? Bhagavan said, first find this ego and bring it here. Then we can find out how or why it came into existence. If we look for it, if we investigate ourselves to find out who am I, this one who rises as ego, there's no such thing as ego at all. We seem to be ego only so long as we attend to things other than ourselves. If we turn our attention within to find out who am I, this ego, there's no such thing as ego to be found. As Bhagavan says in verse 17 of Upadesha Undiyar, Manatin uruve maravadu chava manamena mondrile undipara. Manam there means, manam means mind, but the essence of the mind, as he clarifies in the next verse, verse 18, is just this I, ego. So if we investigate this I without forgetting, there's no such thing as ego at all, or mind at all. So that's why Bhagavan said, first you find this ego and bring it here. Then we can find out how it came into existence. If we look for it, there's no such thing to be found. That's why when people ask Bhagavan questions about how or why, Bhagavan said these are the wrong question. First find out what this ego is. And then if you have any questions about how or why, ask them then. If we try to find out what this ego is just like the snake. If you look carefully at the snake, you find, oh, it's not a snake, it's just a rope. Likewise, if we look carefully at ego, ego disappears just like the snake disappears, and the underlying reality, what it actually is, alone remains. That is the pure being awareness. So ego seems to exist only because of avichara. Avichara means non-investigation. Because we haven't looked at ourselves carefully enough, we lament that we've now risen as ego and are suffering. If we look at ourselves carefully, we will find we have never risen as ego, we have never suffered, but what we actually are is infinite and eternal bliss, happiness.
Shastriji, would you like to ask a question?
Yes, I said in the chat, no, that when one dies, what goes along with the soul?
The soul is ego. What ego takes with it are its vasanas. It is often said in the sastras that it's the subtle body that goes, but the term subtle body is used in different senses in different contexts. In terms of the five sheaths, the subtle body is said to be the pranamaya kosha, manamaya kosha, vijnanamaya kosha, the life, the mind, and the intellect. That is one meaning of subtle body. But Bhagavan, in verse 24 of Ulladu Napadu, Bhagavan says that ego itself is the subtle body. So there he's not confusing ego with those three sheaths. He's saying that he's clarifying that when the term subtle body is used, it's used in different senses. So we need to understand from a context the sense in which it's used. So the subtle body, when it is said the subtle body goes from one life to another, their subtle body refers to ego or jiva. And what it takes with it is only its vasanas. But its vasanas are the seeds that give rise to all the other four sheaths. That's why the vasanas are called the karana sarira, because they give rise to everything else.
Yeah, because I get confused because they talk of five koshas always. So you talk of Anandamaya kosha and then the Pranamaya kosha, they leave, and then you take the other three bodies, or what is
Yeah.
the subtle body? Which part of the subtle body do we take?
Yeah. That is, the five sheaths are classified as three bodies. The Annamaya kosha is called the Stula Sarira. That's a physical body.
Yes.
The Pranamaya kosha, Manomaya kosha, and Vijnanamaya kosha are collectively called the subtle body. And the Anandamaya kosha, the vasanas, are called the Karana Sarira. But that's using the term subtle body in one sense. When it talks about, when the sastras say that the subtle body transmigrates from one body to another, there it's using subtle body in a different sense. It's referring to ego itself. So essentially what goes is ego. But what ego takes with it are its vasanas. And its vasanas are the seeds that give rise to everything else.
But like you said, you must lay low in life, no? You must reduce your vasanas, reduce going outwards.
We must subside to the extent to which we as ego subside, the vasanas subside along with us. But so long as we've got strong vasanas, we are not willing to subside. That's why the abhyasa is necessary. Because what we are the abhyasa that Bhagavan has taught us is this practice of self-attentiveness, holding on to our own being. That is the Vishaya vasanas of the inclination to attend to Vishayas, things other than ourselves, objects or phenomena. Whereas the love to attend to ourselves is called Satvasana. How vasanas gain strength or lose strength, that is, to the extent to which we allow ourselves to be swayed by any vasana, that vasana becomes stronger. So supposing we have we have an inclination to drink alcohol, for example. The more we give in to that inclination, the stronger the inclination becomes, and we may end up as an alcoholic. But if you want to reduce the strength, supposing you have some inclination, you want to get rid of that inclination, you need to avoid being swayed by it. The more you avoid being swayed by it, the weaker it becomes. So when we practice self-attentiveness, we are being swayed by the sattvasana, the inclination to hold on to our being and to be as we are. and we are refraining from being swayed by the Vishaya vasanas, the inclination to attend to other things. So by practice of Atma-vichara, self-investigation, we weaken the Vishaya vasanas and strengthen the Sat vasana. So that's how we overcome all the Vishaya vasanas and become established in Sat, in our own being.
What happens is worldly issues sometimes become overwhelming. You know what is right, no? But things are so overwhelming, Maya sucks you into the whole thing. Then what do you
Yes,
do?
but why we are sucked, it's because of our vasanas. That is, we have cultivated these vasanas through, as Bhagavan says, Tondru Totu Varakindra Vishaya Vasanagal, the Vishaya vasanas that come from time immemorial. So we through crores of janmas, crores of lives, billions of lives, we've been cultivating these Vishaya vasanas. Now so we've got ourselves in this mess. Now we've got to begin unraveling this mess we've got ourselves in by extricating ourselves from all these vasana, these likes, dislikes, desires, attachments, and so on. And how we do so is by this practice of Atma-vichara.
Thank you very much.
And to support us in this practice, we've got Bhagavan's teaching. So by often reading Bhagavan's teachings, thinking about them, that'll give us more and more liking to go within. So Bhagavan's teachings are a great support to us in this practice.
Yes.
But there's no substitute for the practice. The practice is absolutely essential.
Beautiful to listen to you.
Well, if there's any beauty in anything I say, it's because it's coming from Bhagavan.
Yes.
I don't say everything I say is coming from Bhagavan. That's certainly not the case. But by his grace, he gave me this love for his teaching, and so I've been influenced by his teachings, and so I'm saying this. But it's ultimately, it's all from anything of any value in anything I say is coming from Bhagavan. Who am I? I'm nobody.